I've been tracking elk in this part of the country for 20 years. I know the difference between a staggered gait caused by a lung shot and the frantic sprint of a gut-shot beast. I know how blood oxidizes on frozen moss. I know that when you put a 180-grain bullet through the boiler room of a bull elk, it dies. It might run 100 yards, adrenaline pumping the last of its oxygen, but it dies. That's the contract. You pull the trigger, physics takes over, and the animal becomes meat. But the thing Hayes and I were trailing up, that ridge broke the contract. We were 3 days deep into the timber, miles past the old fire breaks where the weekend warriors stop to drink beer and pretend they're outdoorsmen. It was just Hayes and me, the gray sky, and the silence that hangs heavy in the deep woods. The kind of silence that feels less like the absence of noise and more like a held breath. We spotted the bull at dawn. It was magnificent, a heavy 6x6 rack, dark mane, breath steaming in the frigid air. It was standing in a clearing of deadfall, chewing lazily on lichen. Hayes took the shot. He's a surgeon with a rifle. I watched through my scope as the impact rippled through the elk's shoulder. The animal bucked, legs kicking high, and scrambled into the dense hemlock. Solid hit, Hayes whispered, cycling the bolt. Pink mist. Lungs. We waited the requisite 30 minutes to let it bed down and bleed out. When we walked to the impact site, the snow was painted with bright, frothy blood. Arterial spray. Textbook kill. We found the first anomaly 100 yards in. The blood trail didn't thin out. It remained a thick, crimson ribbon, far more fluid than a single animal should possess. It was the tracks that stopped me. Miller, Hayes said, his voice tight. He was kneeling by a patch of mud near a creek crossing. Look at the spread. I crouched beside him. The elk's hoof prints were there, deep in the mud, but the stride length was impossible. Between the last step and this one, the animal had cleared nearly 15 feet without jumping. There were no impact marks, no skid of dew claws digging in for traction. It was as if the animal had simply extended its legs to unnatural lengths to step over the gap. Adrenaline, I said, though I didn't believe it. It's running on pure fear. Elk don't stretch like that, Miller. Nothing does. We kept moving. The sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows through the trees. The temperature dropped, freezing the mud into jagged ridges. The second anomaly appeared 2 miles later. Usually, a wounded animal heads downhill, towards water and thick cover. It takes the path of least resistance. This thing was climbing. It was heading straight up a scree field, a 40-degree incline of loose shale that would break a horse's leg, and the blood had changed. It was no longer bright and frothy. It was dark, almost black, and it smelled wrong. Not like copper and iron. It smelled like bile and wet limestone. I don't like this, Hayes muttered, looking up the slope. The wind was picking up, whistling through the dead pines. It's leading us. It's dying, Hayes. It's confused. It's not confused. Look at the trail. He pointed. The blood trail wasn't erratic. It was a straight line, perfectly straight. The animal hadn't stumbled once. We pushed up the scree, our boots sliding on the loose rock. When we crested the ridge, the light was failing. We entered a dense stand of old-growth spruce, the canopy so thick it choked out the sky. It was dark in there, a gloom that felt heavy and pressurized. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a bugle. It wasn't the distressed cry of a dying animal. It sounded like wetwood snapping, magnified 100 times. Crayak. Splurch. Ahead, I signaled. We moved slowly, rifles shouldered. The smell hit us first, a wave of rot so potent it made my eyes water. It smelled of musk, yes, but underneath there was the sickly sweet stench of ancient, fermented meat. We found the elk standing in a small clearing, facing away from us. It was motionless. Its head hung low, the massive rack of antlers swaying slightly in the breeze. But something was wrong with the silhouette. It looked too tall. The proportions were skewed. Drop it, I whispered. Finish it. Hayes raised his rifle. Miller, look at the knees. I adjusted my scope. The magnification brought the animal's hind legs into sharp relief. The knees were backwards. Not just dog-legged like a quadruped, but inverted entirely, bent sharply upward. And there were too many of them. The leg didn't go hip-knee-ankle. It went hip-joint-joint-joint-ankle. The legs were segmented, like the limbs of a harvestman spider, folded up under the body to simulate the height of an elk. As we watched, the creature shifted its weight. A sickening, wet clicking sound echoed through the clearing. The elk rose. It didn't just stand up, it unfolded. The segmented legs extended, lifting the torso 7, 8, 9 feet into the air. The skin on its flanks stretched tight, translucent and tearing, revealing that underneath the hide, there was no muscle, no organs. Just a cage of white, wet bone and gray sinew moving in a complex, clicking geometry. That's not an elk, Hayes breathed. The creature's head, still wearing the skin, and antlers of the bull swiveled. It didn't turn on a neck. It rotated 180 degrees with the sound of grinding gristle. The eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with the same dark, black fluid we had been tracking. It saw us. Hayes fired. The shot roared, the muzzle flash illuminating the clearing for a split second. I saw the bullet hit the chest. The hide puffed out, but there was no impact tremor. The creature didn't flinch. It simply absorbed the energy, the loose skin rippling like water. Then it moved. It didn't run. It scuttled. The multi-jointed legs moved with a horrific, frenetic speed, tearing up the earth. It closed the 40 yards between us in seconds, moving in a low, zigzagging blur that the eye couldn't track. Run, I screamed, backing up and firing blindly. Hayes didn't run. He froze. It's a reaction I've seen in greenhorns, but never in a veteran. His brain simply couldn't process the biology coming at him. He stood there, rifle half-raised, mouth open. The creature didn't bite him. It didn't gore him. It collided with him. The long, spider-like legs wrapped around Hayes, not crushing him, but pinning him. The creature's torso collapsed onto him, the elk, skin draping over him like a wet blanket. I heard Hayes scream, a sound that quickly turned into a wet gurgle. I turned and ran. I ran with the reckless abandon of prey, tearing through brambles that sliced my face, stumbling over roots, sliding down the scree field we had climbed an hour ago. Behind me, the forest was filled with sounds that will never leave me. It wasn't the sound of eating. It was the sound of rearrangement, the wet snapping of bone, the popping of cartilage being forced into new angles, and underneath it all a low, chittering sound, like 1,000 insects vibrating in a hollow log. I made it to the tree line of the valley floor and collapsed, my lungs burning, my ankle twisted. I lay there in the dark, rifle pointed back at the ridge, shivering so hard the barrel rattled against my teeth. I waited for it to come for me. I waited for the clicking joints, the smell of rot, but it didn't come. Instead, silence reclaimed the woods. A heavy, absolute silence. Then, from high up on the ridge, I heard a bugle. It started as a normal elk call, a high-pitched whistle rising to a scream. But halfway through, the timbre changed. The pitch dropped, gargling and warping. It shifted into a human voice, distorted and stretched, screaming a single, elongated syllable that echoed off the canyon walls. Me-I-Lilileer. It was Hayes' voice, but it sounded like it was being pushed through a throat made of PVC pipe and gravel. Then silence again. I didn't sleep. I didn't move until the sun came up. I hiked out, 18 miles without stopping, without looking back. I left my gear, my pack, everything but the rifle. I reported it as a bear attack. I told the sheriff we got separated, and I heard a commotion. They did a search. They found Hayes' rifle. They found his boots, laced tight, still standing upright in the mud. But they didn't find Hayes. Or rather, they didn't find a body. They found tracks. The search and rescue lead, a guy I've known for years, pulled me aside at the trailhead a week later. He looked pale, shaken. He told me they found elk tracks leading away from the site where they found the boots. But they were wrong, Miller, he whispered, looking over his shoulder. The tracks, the stride was huge, 20 feet between steps, and the weight, the depth of the prints suggested the animal weighed 2,000 pounds. He paused, swallowing hard. And Miller, the tracks, Only 2 of them were hooves. The other 2, the rear ones. He didn't have to say it. I knew. They looked like hands, he whispered. Big, splayed hands pressing into the mud. I stopped hunting. I sold my guns. I moved to the city, where the only sounds are sirens and traffic. But sometimes, when the wind blows right, coming off the mountains in the west, I can hear it. I can hear the clicking. And I know that somewhere up on that ridge, there's a stag with too many joints, walking through the timber on legs that shouldn't exist. And woven into that cage of bone and rot, there's a part of it that remembers my name. Hey, that's the Strawberry Bear. It was a dark, gloomy Friday afternoon. My 8-year-old sister Emma chirped cheerfully, tugged at the hem of my hoodie while we're walking home from school. I looked up from my phone to the other side of the road. Standing there was this person in a plushy bear costume, its features exaggerated and cartoonish, with big, round blue eyes full of glitters, a large red bow at the neck, and various strawberry accessories from head to paws. It was holding up a bouquet of floating balloons and dancing apathetically. Poor thing, I thought, must be suffocating staying in that costume all day, swaying back and forth entertaining noisy kids. The cheap fur textile looked wet and matted, probably because of the heavy rain earlier. Can I take a picture with him, please, Luke? Emma pleaded. I frowned. No, we have to be home early, remember? I don't want Mom to frantic call me like last time. I was being a dick, I know. All kids around here loved the Strawberry Bear. Emma was no exception. Strawberry Bear Company started off as an ice cream and candy franchise. Then later, when the mascot became popular, they began to sell merches and plushies of the beloved bear as well. It's considered cool among the kids to have pictures taken with the Strawberry Bear. Emma seemed visibly sad, but she had always been a decent sister, so she just held onto my hand as we headed home. I remembered feeling frustrated. Neither of us wanted this. Emma was old enough to walk home alone, and her elementary school is just several blocks away from home. Meanwhile, my high school is further away, and I had to take a different bus route to Emma's school to accompany her. That means I would miss out on the after-school activities with my friends, and understandably, I acted out on her. It sucks. My parents were not always this way. In fact, they used to encourage Emma and me to have fun after school and be independent. Things changed when the kids in our neighborhood started to disappear. Only some were found, or to be exact, parts of them. Whoever did that was a fucking monster. I overheard the police using the word scattered to describe the remains they found. The chain of events led to my mom gradually became paranoid. She made me walk Emma home every day, and even set a time that we both need to be present. Last Friday, I thought an ice cream wouldn't hurt and took Emma to the park, which resulted in my mom calling and crying and acting all hysterical. I tried to be understanding, but parts of me were mad and helpless. I started to resent all of this. Emma was too young to get the whole picture, but I could tell that she's scared and frustrated too. As we hurried past the Strawberry Bear, I could feel her grip tightened. Something was wrong when we looked at the costume, but I didn't know for sure. The bear stood still. Days gone by, no leads on the disappeared kids, and I grew bored walking Emma home. I missed playing soccer with my buddies, and some days, if I was lucky, I would be seeing Alex on the bench too. She's a nice girl, I guess. I find myself staring at her short, fluffy, strawberry blonde hair more than I'd want to admit. Sam was the first of my friends to recognize that. Hey, you ain't coming to the match today? He asked during recess. Alex will be there. I rolled my eyes, but my heart did beat faster. And you're so sure because one of her friends told me. You know, I'm popular among ladies. I laughed. Sam's always too confident. He thinks he's funny, but that helped lift my spirit. It's good to think about something else other than your sister and the crazy murderer running around. Look, dude, I'd love to go, but I have to pick up Emma. No bargaining on that. Aw man, just dig her for one day. We miss having you on the team. Let's see, I said and waved him goodbye. I thought about the possibilities during afternoon classes. Since last month, I have walked Emma home every day, and nothing ever happened. Nobody came to her or tried to lure her away. Our home is so close to her school. She's old enough to call for help, and my mom drilled the stranger danger thing into our heads. It wouldn't matter if I leave her alone for one day. Just one day for myself, for my buddies and Alex, as a reward for me being so reliable and consistent. It would only make sense. Emma would be home before my mom even noticed. I kept making excuses until the bell rang. I didn't catch the bus to Emma's school. Sam tossed me a spare pair of soccer pants and said he's glad I decided to be a man. The weather was nice. A soft breeze ruffles Alex's hair as she smiled at me from the benches. She has bright blue eyes, just like mine, just like Emma's, just like the missing kids I saw across new papers. They made me feel sick. "Hey dude, you okay?" Sam seemed worried. I tried to catch my breath and get ready for the match, but my stomach churned, and before I could clear my head, I just spoke. "Sam, can I borrow your bike?" "Well, sure, dude, but why?" "I need to get to Emma." I took the keys from him and just sped toward the bike. I had no idea if bike speeding is an offense, but if it does, then I would have gotten several tickets that day. I kept pedaling until I saw Emma on her way home. She looked sad, probably because I didn't come, and judging by the distance, she must have waited for at least an hour before giving up and leaving by herself. "Emma," I yelled. "Look." Emma turned her head and beamed. She ran to give me a tight hug. I was so worried that the bad guy got you. I suddenly had the urge to punch my past self in the face. While I focused on my feelings and missed fun times, I forgot that Emma was also stressed and scared due to all the news. Yet she was worried about me. "I'm sorry, Emma." "It's okay," she murmured. "Is that Sam's bike?" "What happened?" "Nothing important. Let's go home." As we walked down the street, I once again caught sight of the strawberry bear. It was the same one we saw last time. I could tell by the wet, matted fur and the same bouquet of floating balloons. Emma didn't ask for a picture this time. She just grabbed the sleeve of my hoodie and lowered her head. Realization hit me like an ice guy truck. I know. I learned that joke from Sam. People wearing strawberry bear costumes always prefer crowded places, like parks, malls, or public events, for advertisement purpose. Why did this one stand here, on an empty street, in the afternoon, during such a gloomy day? Chills ran down my spine. I told Emma, "Get on the bike." She seemed surprised, but didn't argue. I kept an eye on the bear when we went past it. I imagined that it would chase us with a knife, or something, but the strawberry bear just stood still. Next time I saw it, it was all over the news. I remembered seeing the bear's picture on TV screen, the feeling of bile rising up my throat, the fear so real that made my skin crawl. He was the monster who murdered all those kids. That man, who used to work for the Strawberry Bears Company, stole a costume and using it to lure them into his basement. He only got caught because he started to get confident and targeted an older kid who was conscious enough to run and alert the police about his scheme. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. If I had left Emma alone that day, if I hadn't given up my match and the chance to talk to Alex. Look, Emma poked her head out of the bedroom's door, confused. I just strode towards her, knelt down, and pulled her into a tight embrace, fingers trembling. I was terrified of what could have happened to her. Like I mentioned, Emma is a decent sister, so she just stood there and awkwardly patted my back. "Luke, don't be sad. I'll give you my old toy, okay? Since Mom bought me a new one." She whipped out a strawberry bear plushie. I laughed half-heartedly and declined the offer. I would have endless nightmares if I had that thing in my room. But looking at the bear again, under broad daylight, I finally realized why it felt so wrong. Emma's plushie, the official mascot, has bright, almost neon pink fur. I hugged my sister again, tighter, fighting the urge to gag. The strawberry bear murderer we met dressed in a wet, matted, burgundy-colored costume. It was drenched in blood. Hi there, mates. I am writing on here because this is a really weird experience I am having and I wanted to share. So to start off, I am blind. It ain't easy living my life, but it is easier than people give it credit for. The most annoying part of my opinion is that I need to keep my wits about me in public, so I don't drink often. And when I do, it is very little. I leave my bigger drinking for house parties, or just once in a blue moon drinking nights, where for whatever reason you decide to just get drunk at home. It was on one of these nights that it started. I moved up here to Vermont to get away from the bugs in the South. I always enjoyed sitting out in nature, but since I went blind, my skin has become sensitive to little bug feet. It messes with me, and when I got the money to move, I did so. Found a nice town, not too small, not too big, with sidewalks, and bought a house. My home butts up against wooded land. Maybe a national forest. Frankly, I am not sure. It ain't like I can read the signs. Bad blind joke. I got myself a nice big bench made from sturdy wood and put it on the edge of the property and dug myself a burn pit. Nothing like listening to an audiobook while warming yourself by the fire on a cool night. So it was about a month since I moved in that the visitors started coming by. The first time I had just said goodbye to some new friends, making sure they had sober drivers. Once I locked down the front of the home, I mixed myself another drink and stumbled my way to the bench and fire pit. The fire was still going when I got there. We had lit it for the house party. I took a few minutes with my cane moving it around to find all the used cans and cups. I stacked them all together under the bench before settling down and clicking play on my audiobook. The fire had died down a lot, and I was about to call it a night when I heard footsteps approaching me. Who could that be so late at night? I thought to myself, but was too drunk to care. I am that kind of drunk that is loud and happy and wants everyone around them to have a good night. So when I heard footsteps, my second thought was new friend. So I called out to them, "Hey mate, wanna come sit by the fire?" I heard nothing for a bit until heavy footsteps strode closer. They got closer and louder, and I began to wonder how big this person was. Then they sat on the other end of the bench. My bench is a little longer than normal, about 7 feet. That way I could lay on it if I wanted to, and still have enough room for my speaker or food. I started up a conversation with them, but they didn't reply much. Sometimes they would grunt, but mostly they just kept quiet and let me talk. So I did. I told them about my blindness and about moving to a strange place. How I was seeking friendships to have people in my life who can help me look out for danger. I talked for a while before I was all talked out, and I held my hand out to them. They grasped it in a very large hand, and we shook before I wished them good night and stumbled to my bed. That started something. My new friend wouldn't show up every night, but when they did, all they would do is sit close to the fire and listen. I started noticing things about them. The first was the smell, and I figured they were just homeless, and they just needed a place to shower. I offered to let them use my shower, but I got a grunt that I considered and thought it meant something like, "No thanks." But I wasn't really sure, so in my head I had it that they were a homeless person that had experienced some sort of mental trauma that made them nonverbal. Not the best friend a blind man can have, but still I may have been this person's only friend for all I knew. This odd friendship went pretty good for a few months. Then that night came, the night all blind people fear. The night when someone invades your home. I was out by the fire that night, listening to an audiobook on low volume. My new friend, I had started calling him Oak, because like the oak he was big and quiet, was sitting in their normal spot. The sound of breaking glass reached me, and I stood and wondered if I had set a cup half on / half off the counter. It sometimes happened. I took a step towards the house to go find the mess while it was still a fresh memory. A growl from behind stopped me in my tracks. I had never heard a noise like that before. It was deep and resonate. I could feel it bouncing around inside my head. Then my friend stood, and with just a couple of heavy footfalls, they had made it to my house. I heard them open my back sliding glass door and enter my home. I went to take another step when I heard the first scream from inside my home. Jesus Christ, what the hell is that thing? Get away, get away! Then shrieking, and my glass back door was blown outwards by a person sprinting. Who the fuck are you? I called out. Now, there's something else you should know about blind people. We forget about lights. It's just not something that we think about, because we don't need them. So when I called out, I did it from the darkness. The person let loose with such a loud, sharp scream that hurt my ears and spooked me. So I screamed in shock, which caused the other person to freak out more and bolt into the woods. I stood there for a few minutes before heading back towards my house, totally freaked out and needing to call the cops. I heard glass crunching, and my friend walked past me dragging something behind them. The smell of my friend plus blood wafted towards me. "Are you okay?" I asked them, and all I got back was a grunt. I went inside to find a smartphone that is actually connected to a network and called the cops. The cops later explained that they believed that 2 men had entered my home, but that something had attacked them. They found a severed human arm laying on my couch. There was a lot of blood too, and I got the cops to take photos for me. My insurance was going to have fun with this one. The cops did find the tracks of the sprinting man and the drag marks from my friend, whom had dragged the other person away. They told me that with all the blood, they thought that the second robber was dead. So now I am home alone, the cleaning crew, finally left after CSI took forever. There's a tarp over my back door and one over my office window. I really like that my friend helped me out, but at the same time, what kind of person drags a body into the woods? Is my friend even human? What have I been sharing the fire with? I don't know, and that's why I'm posting it here. What happens if they get mad at me? I want to see it coming that W moments more before nature called to me and Ty. Do you ever wonder how different your life might have turned out if you changed just one small detail? Changed one seemingly minor decision? I never really considered it until I found Lucy's Cafe. I may never have noticed it if I hadn't been looking in the recessed doorways along that side street downtown for a place to spit out my gum. And I wouldn't have been walking down that side street if I hadn't left my headlights on and killed my car battery the night before. And I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't answered when my ex called as I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building. But all of those things did happen, and that's how I ended up there. After I spit out my gum in the garbage can outside, I glanced up at my reflection in the unique storefront window, as pitch black as if it had been cut from volcanic glass. Old English lettering spelled out Lucy's Cafe in fiery hues that seemed to shift like glowing embers. I had never seen anything quite like it. I just had to have a look inside. The interior of the little shop was not as interesting. It looked more like a dingy waiting room than a coffee shop with a couple of chipped formica tables and yellowing linoleum. I might have turned to go if not for the barista behind the peeling laminate counter, a slender young woman with nervous hands. "Good morning." She greeted me with a little too much enthusiasm, as if she had never seen a customer in her life and hadn't particularly expected to. "Please have a seat." "Good morning," I replied, already beginning to regret having opened the door. "I'm already late for work, but maybe I'll take something to go." I squinted around at the walls, but found them blank except for a couple of generic art prints. "Got a menu?" "Don't need one," she replied, already pulling a mug from behind the counter. "We only serve black coffee, but it is a very, unique blend." "I don't know," I said, smiling politely as I stepped backward towards the door. "I'm more of a cream and sugar type of guy." "You don't need that," she nearly shouted, throwing up her hands in a halting gesture as my fingers groped behind me for the doorknob. "Maybe another time. Have a nice dash." "Wait, please," she cried, her voice shrill with desperation, which she tried to cover with a hollow, humorless laugh. "It's very smooth. Just try it. You'll see." Pity for this obviously struggling business owner was beginning to win out over my own good sense, so I approached the counter. "All right, Lucy. Can I have it to go, please?" "I'm late for work," I repeated, beginning to get annoyed as I watched her pour a steaming liquid into a chipped porcelain mug. "No need," she exclaimed, shoving the mug towards me with a smile that was a bit too wide and toothy. "It'll only take a second." I frowned as I looked at the dark liquid in the mug. It was black, all right. Not the rich, warm brown black of every other coffee I'd ever seen, but a thick, inky black that more closely resembled oil. I took the mug by the handle and swirled the contents, which coated the sides like thick paint. It certainly didn't smell like coffee either. I wrinkled my nose at the smoky smell of charcoal and pushed the mug away. "You know what? I'm gonna pass on that," I said as I turned away. Have a good one, though. Wait, please. She cried again, but I ignored her and continued towards the door. I only turned when her hands closed around my arm, and she tried to physically pull me back inside with surprising strength for such a petite girl. What the hell is wrong with you? I said, finally raising my voice as I wrenched my arm away from her clutching fingers. Please, you don't understand. She cried just before I slammed the door behind me. Crazy, I muttered to myself as I pulled my coat around me and hurried the few remaining blocks to my office building. Little did I know what an understatement that would turn out to be. Hey, Cheryl. Good morning. I smiled as I passed the receptionist, a sweet older lady known for her ever-growing collection of colorful cat-eye glasses. Morning, Sam, she said, returning my smile as I made my way to the elevators. Have to go back and drink that coffee, Sam, she added cheerfully. I stopped in my tracks and whirled around to face her. What did you say? I asked. I said have a nice day, she said, looking at least as confused as I felt. Oh, right. You too, I said as I turned back toward the elevator. Must have imagined it. The elevator was empty except for the quiet janitor leaning against his cart. The usual canned music was suddenly interrupted by a commercial. For coffee. When did they start running ads? I laughed, gesturing to the overhead speakers. The man, who had previously been fiddling with his phone, glanced up at me and shrugged, but I got the distinct and uncomfortable impression that he didn't have the first idea what I was talking about. That notion was soon confirmed by the way he glanced at me over his shoulder as he got off on the floor below mine. Whatever. Just a coincidence. On my arrival to the office, I ducked past my boss's office and made a beeline for my cubicle. Morning, guys, I said to my desk neighbors, Brian and Pete. Morning, Pete said without looking up from the puzzle game he was playing on his phone. Nice of you to finally join us. Pete grinned as he leaned back in his chair so far it looked like he might tip over. You know how we hate to suffer alone. Least I'm not already taking a break, I said, gesturing at Brian, who remained hunched over his screen, scowling down at the kaleidoscope of candy graphics. He's been on break for, like, 10 years at least. Pete chuckled. Right, Bree. Don't call me that unless you want to be called PP. Brian retorted without so much as moving anything but his thumbs. I snorted with laughter at that. The banter went a long way towards re-establishing normalcy. I was already starting to forget about the strange beginning to my day. I opened my email and turned my attention to a message from an important client. The message started out normally enough, just a request for some adjustments to the usual weekly order, which I added into the flow sheet I'd sent to the warehouse. I almost didn't notice the postscript. P.S. You really should have drunk that coffee, Sam. You better go back before it's too late. What the fuck? I said loud enough to garner the attention of the guys. What's the matter? Pete asked. Brian actually put his phone down and peered around the divider, frowning. I moved to the side so he could see my computer screen. Am I losing it? What's this say? I asked him, pointing to the postscript. He scooted himself closer on his rolling chair and pushed his glasses up on his nose. Says, Good morning, Samuel. Samuel. Pete chuckled next door. Not that part, I said, ignoring the latter. Just the postscript. Brian leaned forward more and squinted at the screen. Postscript. Right there, I said, leaning in next to him, intending to point at the message, only to find that it was no longer there. Brian blinked at me as he wheeled himself out of my cubicle. You okay, man? He just needs to go back to Lucy's and drink that coffee, right, bud? Pete chimed in. I stood up and peered over the divider at Pete, who seemed thoroughly engrossed in whatever he was typing. Pete, yeah, he said without looking up. You say something just now. Nope. Guess you really are losing it. He said, eyes still fixated on his screen as his fingers flew over the keyboard. I turned to see Brian still frowning at me from his chair. You sure you're all right, man? Actually, I began. I'm not feeling so hot. I think I'm gonna head home. I'll see you guys tomorrow. I grabbed my coat off the back of my chair and shrugged into it as I headed towards the door before anyone had a chance to say anything else about. Make sure you go straight to Lucy's. Brian's voice called out just before I shouldered the office door open. I didn't even bother looking back, and there was no way I was going back to that place. I didn't even take the same street on my walk back home. So imagine my surprise when I tripped over a crack in the sidewalk and caught myself on a window of odd, black glass with shimmering red lettering. Yes, I don't even have to tell you what it said. I spun away and speed walked the rest of the way home without incident. I thought that perhaps I hadn't been sleeping well lately. Maybe if I just lay down for a while, maybe if I could get some sleep, I'd wake up and never hear about Lucy's Cafe again. Never even think about it, ideally. So, I headed to the bathroom to wash up and change before I lay down. When I twisted the faucet on, I jerked my hand away as if burned. The substance that flowed from the tap was just as thick, oily and black as the coffee at Lucy's. I squeezed my eyes shut against the vision, shook my head as if that could rid it of the memory. Not happening, I said out loud to no one. Not happening. When I finally gathered the courage to open my eyes, the water flowing in the sink was as clear as ever. There was not so much as a gray film in the basin. Still, I cut off the tap without washing my face. Maybe later. I plugged my phone in before slipping underneath the covers. It vibrated as it always does. But this time, the little notification bar along the bottom of the screen read, "Go back, Sam. 57 minutes until it's too late." I closed my eyes and shook my head again, since that seemed to turn the tap water back into tap water a few minutes ago. When I peeked at the screen, it read, "Super fast charging. 57 minutes until full." Jesus, I'm really psyching myself out. I mumbled to the empty room. For several minutes, I laid in bed listening to the pounding of my own heart. Too late for what? I thought over and over. I reached for the remote on my nightstand. Perhaps a comedy would help get my mind off of Lucy's Cafe. The television speakers bellowed in a car salesman's thundering baritone. Although my fingers frantically smashed the power button, the screen continued to glow and promptly displayed a model leaning against a brand new Honda. She smiled and held out a steaming, chipped mug. "We're waiting for you, Samuel." She grinned, unable to tear my eyes away. I noticed that she bore a striking resemblance to the barista from THS Morning, although perhaps that was just the too wide smile. I got up and unplugged the television, only to find that it continued to implore me to return to the coffee shop of horrors. I stood with my arms crossed and stared at the image on the screen. Thick, ink-black liquid tumbling from carafe into the chipped ceramic mug that never filled up. It did not look appetizing in the least. I stood in front of the rogue appliance in my boxers and stared at it with my arms crossed for several minutes. Finally, I made a decision. I picked it up and crossed the apartment and set it outside in the hallway. My elderly neighbor, who happened to be standing in the hall with a fistful of mail, stared at me with her mouth open. "Don't mind him, Miss Ellie," I said with a smile that I'm sure looked at least mildly deranged. "Just taking out this piece of shit." I cackled and kicked the screen until the image of the Neverfull mug splintered into a kaleidoscope of Neverfull mugs. I never want to fucking see it ever again. "Sam," Ms. Ellie said, her soft voice quavering as her hands shook and her letters fell to the floor. I felt instantly guilty and took a step towards her, forgetting that I was sweaty, disheveled, and nearly naked. "I'm sorry, Ms. Ellie," I began. "I've just had a really rough mordash. Maybe it would get better if you'd just fucking go back to Lucy's instead of scaring old ladies in hallways, you piece of shit." She shrieked before slamming the door to her apartment. I stood in the hallway between Ms. Ellie's abandoned mail and my ruined television, shaking with laughter. I laughed until I thought I might vomit. I was still laughing and clutching my aching guts as I turned back toward my apartment. I wasn't even surprised to find that it was made of black glass, the name of the coffee shop smoldering in red. I laughed some more and wiped the tears from my eyes before heading inside. Everything looked the same as it had this morning. The barista stood behind the counter, the chipped mug still sitting in front of her, still steaming as if I had only just left. I looked her right in the eye as I strode toward the counter. She smiled at me. "You win, Lucy," I said as I picked up the mug and drained the contents in several long gulps. The barista smiled wider and I soon wished I'd savored the beverage. It didn't taste at all like coffee. It was delicious, sweet and earthy. It warmed my throat and belly pleasantly like wine. The barista clapped and shrieked her gratitude. She ran around the counter and hugged me tight before running towards the door. "I'm free," she shouted. "Free," and then she was gone. I tried to follow, and that's WHE. I learned Lucy's first rule. I can't leave, not until I convince a customer to drink the coffee. I can step through the door, but I'm right back inside the cafe. I have learned several things since then. Lucy is not the barista, as I assumed. Lucy lives downstairs. He's teaching me things. He talks to me all day, although I've never seen him. He just kind of puts the words into my head, you know. No, I guess you don't, at least. Not yet. He says I'll learn the magic the barista used to get me here, eventually. But first, I have to learn to read the strange symbols his books are written in. It must have taken the old barista an eternity. I would really prefer not to wait that long. It's boring as fuck here, if I'm being honest. Lucy says I will live forever now and never age. Once I find my replacement, I'll be free to spend my eternal life as I please. He even provides you with small fortune when you earn your freedom. Call it a severance package. It's not such a bad deal, really. Anyway, I'm glad I grabbed my phone before I left my apartment so I could tell the story and invite you to try this coffee for yourself. If you ever stumble upon the place, which, now that it's in your head, you will. At least, that's what Lucy says. They tell you, when you sign up for the journalism elective, that you're supposed to pick stories that matter. True crime matters. People listen when you talk about true crime. A little bit of background. I'm Claudia. I'm 24, a theater major who wandered into a journalism workshop because narrative nonfiction sounded like an easy A and maybe a way to write better monologues. Instead, I got a 40-page syllabus, ethics codes, deadlines, and a professor who says lead like it's holy scripture. I wanted to hate it. I really did. Somewhere between the lectures on structure and the deep dives into old features, I realized I liked it. I really liked it. It scratched a part that my theater girl brain never quite reached. The hunt, the way real life could be cut and arranged into scenes. The illusion that if you just ask enough questions, you can make something sharp and complete out of chaos. For our final, Professor Halperin told us to pick a cold case or unresolved mystery and build a multimedia deep dive around it. Documents, interviews, audio. The more immersive, the better. I opened my mouth before I could stop myself and called Zodiac. People groaned. Someone muttered something about, of course. I didn't care. I've been obsessed with the Zodiac Killer since I was 15 and fell into a Wikipedia hole at 3 a.m. like every other anxious teen with Wi-Fi. The hood, the symbol, the letters with their stupid little jokes. It felt like a horror movie that refused to roll credits. Also, I live in the Bay. I've been to some of those places. They're just names on a bus schedule now. But if you say them out loud in the right company, people still flinch. My roommate Sophie, also a theater major, always overscheduled and permanently sticky with stage makeup from our production of Hair, made a face at me after class. I love her. She wanted to know why I didn't pick something fun, like D.B. Cooper or the Patterson-Gimlin film. Something with missing money or blurry footage instead of actual bodies. I told her it was perfect. Tapes, letters, creepy sketches, suspects for days. The original extended cinematic universe. She warned me not to turn into one of those true crime sleuths making conspiracy theories about Arthur Lee Allen's shoe size. I promised I wouldn't. I was already mentally choosing fonts. Social media makes research look cute. That cute girl with a latte and the open laptop. Fake reading in perfect lighting? Yeah, that's not it. Real research is fluorescence, dust, and your spine turning into a question mark over a microfilm machine. Our campus library has a decent local archive. It also has a librarian who, when I said I was working on the Zodiac, paused just a fraction too long and said they get a lot of requests. I joked I was surprised it wasn't a major. She didn't laugh. I started with the basics. The letters, the police bulletins, the stuff every documentary drags out with dramatic music. The first time I saw the ciphers blown up on paper instead of a tiny JPEG on my phone, they made my teeth hurt. You know the ones, circles, triangles, weird little boxes, backward letters. The 408 cipher a schoolteacher and his wife solved over a weekend. The later ones nobody's cracked. They're basically American pop culture now, slapped on t-shirts and podcast thumbnails. Up close, though, they're ugly. Aggressive. The symbols don't sit politely inside the little grid boxes. They crowd and lean into each other. Some have those tiny hooks at the ends, like the writer couldn't quite lift the pen, like the motion wanted to keep going. I traced a line of them in the air over the page, not actually touching, because the librarian had warned me about oils from your skin. My fingertip tingled anyway, the way your tongue does when you touch a battery. That night I dreamed about handwriting. Not words, just shapes. I was in our black box theater, but instead of an audience, there were rows of empty folding chairs. On each seat, a page of cipher. I knew somehow that my job was to read them out loud, not translate, perform. My mouth tried to make sounds that didn't belong in any language I knew. My tongue felt too thick. Somewhere in the back row, something laughed. Not at me. Excited. When I woke up, my nose was bleeding. Just a few drops on the pillowcase. Sophie saw it after a run and told me I needed to stop doing murder homework at 2 in the morning because my brain was leaking out. She asked if I was starting a Zodiac fan club. I told her not unless snacks were involved. I didn't tell her about the dream. The next step was interviews. Halpern wanted at least 3 sources with direct connection to the case. That's hard when your case is older than your parents, but not impossible. We're in the Bay. This story has roots everywhere. I emailed everyone, retired cops, surviving family members, armchair sleuths who turned their obsession into a brand. Most never replied. A few gave polite, no thank yous. One reply came in at 2:17 in the morning from a retired Vallejo detective named Redacted Larkin. He said he didn't do interviews about that anymore. Not for TV, not for podcasts, not for kids who treat it like a spooky legend. He told me if I was smart, I'd pick something else. I stared at the email while the fridge hummed and Sophie sang something from Hair very badly in the shower. Then I wrote back that I wasn't a kid and I wasn't trying to turn it into a ghost story. I wanted to write about how we tell stories about violence, about the case as a narrative that eats its own tail. I promised I'd be respectful. Even 20 minutes of his time would help. I hovered over send and caught my reflection in the dark monitor. Ink on my wrist, dark circles under my eyes. Behind me, and screen's reflection. The closet door stood open a crack. There was something in the gap. Tall, blocky, hooded. I whipped around fast enough that my chair squealed. The closet was just clothes, my dresses on one side, Sophie's 70s shirts and fringe, and chaos on the other. No hood, no symbol. When I looked back at the monitor, my reflection lagged a half-second. The closet door and the reflection was closed. I told myself I was tired and hit send. Larkin agreed to meet, but only on neutral ground, which turned out to be a downtown diner that smelled like burnt coffee and sugar. He had cop posture, back to the wall, eyes on the door. He recognized me immediately and said I walked like I was hitting marks. I decided I liked him. I'm not going to write out every word he said. That's not what this is. But I'll tell you the parts that matter. He talked about inheriting Zodiac files, how it felt like being handed a cursed baton. He mentioned the usual suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, and said if he had to put money on anyone, it'd probably be him, but that he'd seen too many men fit too many boxes. The symbol on the watch, the proximity, the timing. It all works until it doesn't. There's DNA on the stamps that doesn't match him, unless you believe he had someone else lick them. What stuck with me wasn't who he thought did it. It was what he told me not to do. He asked me if I'd ever read the letters out loud. I told him no, because I hadn't. Not awake anyway. He told me not to. He said there were patterns they couldn't put in reports because they sounded crazy. Guys who worked the case too long got strange. One had what the department called a psychotic episode. One killed himself. A clerk who handled the letters developed night terrors about a man in a hood at the corner of his bed. He said he thought words had weight. You put them in the right order, they become more than themselves. That's why people love award-winning narrative and not bullet points. Then he told me, very specifically, don't read them out loud. Don't copy them by hand. Don't decide you're going to be the one who cracks the secret message. Let it stay dead. I asked him if he'd ever seen anything himself. His jaw locked. The interview was over. He walked out so fast it was like I'd flipped a switch. A few days later, my professor forwarded me an email from a local public radio station. They'd heard about the class project and wanted to let us dig through old reel-to-reel tapes, news segments, call-ins, anything Zodiac adjacent. Perfect atmosphere for my piece, he said. The building was ugly concrete, the kind of place that looks like it smells like toner. A grad student intern with huge headphones walked me down to the archive. Long room, metal shelves, rows of tapes, everything faintly humming with age. He showed me how to work the player and left me with a paper log. The first reel I picked was a 1969 newscast about Vallejo. Tinny male voice, lots of alleged and shocking violence. The second was callers arguing about whether Zodiac was a hoax or one guy or government psyops. The third was just a number with a scribble on the log. Unknown pos. Letter reading. I hit play. At first, nothing but hiss. Then breathing, too close to the mic. A man's voice came in, careful and slow, like an old radio announcer. He said, "At last you will listen." The man began to read. It wasn't one of the text letters. It was the first cipher. I recognized the pattern. 3 rows, 8 columns, symbols like a drunk alien alphabet. Only he wasn't saying English words. Hell, he wasn't speaking any language. He was making sounds. Clicks, hisses, little bursts that weren't quite consonants, weren't quite vowels. Some slid up into frequencies that made my teeth hurt. The fluorescent lights over my head flickered. I told myself it was bad ballasts. I kept listening. Under his voice, something scraped, like a chair dragged slowly across concrete in another room. My skin crawled. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When he reached the end of wherever line he was on, he laughed. It was wrong, like someone trying to imitate human amusement using sliders. Too high, then too low, warbling between both. I slammed stop. The room went still. The lights stopped flickering. The tape machine clicked as it came to rest. On the far wall was a framed vintage poster under glass. In its reflection, over my shoulder, I saw someone standing behind me. Tall, shoulder-wide, a hood shaped almost like a cereal box covered in fabric. A white circle and cross right at chest level. It looked exactly like the costume described by a surviving victim. I turned around so hard I almost knocked the machine over. Empty aisle, metal shelves, closed door. I looked back at the glass. For a heartbeat, the hooded figure was still there, clearer now, like he'd leaned forward. Then he wasn't. By the time Sophie got home from rehearsal that night, the kitchen table was buried in ciphers. I'd convinced the librarian to let me scan and enlarge them, and I was tracing the symbols with a fine-tip pen, like I could soak them into my bones through repetition. She walked in, took one look, and said, "Absolutely not." She reminded me I'd promised no reading them out loud, no code breaking in my free time. I told her I wasn't reading them. Technically true. I was whispering. I said I was just trying to understand the structure shape-wise. She said my voice sounded calm, but my eyeballs looked like they'd seen God. She pointed out that I'd been forgetting to eat, that I hummed something weird in my sleep, that I'd written this as the Zodiac speaking on our grocery list in all caps. I tried to laugh and say it was a joke. Even to my own ears, it sounded weak. Behind her, in the dark kitchen window, I saw our reflections, 2 tired girls, a table full of Xeroxed murder, and behind my reflected shoulder, him again. Hood, symbol, closer this time, the circle cross faintly glowing like something catching a stage light. My breath hitched. She started to turn to look and asked what I'd seen. By the time she did, it was just our courtyard, glass and dark. She told me, quietly, that she thought she saw someone too. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally drifted off just before dawn, I dreamed he was standing at the foot of my bed, exactly where she'd said her night terrors guy stood. Hood symbol, nothing behind the eye holes, but layers of dark. He lifted his hand and touched the tip of a pen to the center of my chest. I woke up gasping, clutching at my sternum like there'd be a wound. There was nothing, just a hot ache under the skin, like a bruise thinking about existing. The deeper I dug, the less it felt like a case, and the more it felt like a story that had been running since long before the 1960s and was just using that era as its most popular act. Handwriting experts and old reports said the letters didn't all look like the same person wrote them. Not just disguise, but different authorship qualities, like someone consciously shifting style between each letter. Some early suspects, people they eventually cleared, went on to have breakdowns, psych issues. One of them was Arthur Lee Allen. In a psych note I shouldn't have had access to, the university sloppy. A doctor scribbled that Allen reported recurring dreams of a hooded figure with the circle cross on his chest standing in the corner of his room. The doctor added there was no evidence Allen ever owned such an outfit. I read that 5 times. When I tried to tell Halperin that maybe the article wasn't going to be about who Zodiac was, but about how the idea of him infects people, he smiled and called it a very theater major take. I found it both cute and mildly inconvenient. He told me to focus on what I could prove, that the dead shouldn't be treated like props. The 1890s came out of nowhere. I was in the basement, scrolling microfilm of coverage from the 60s, when an older headline on the same reel caught my eye. Probably misfiled. 1923. Families murdered near Mare Island. Below a strange sign, there was a blurry photo of a barn wall. Chalked on it, big and clumsy, a circle with a cross in the middle. I went back. I found more. 1911. Painter dead in his studio. Same symbol on the floor. 1902. Letters to an Oakland family defaced with occult, astrological signs, including a circle and cross, described almost exactly like the Zodiac one. One anonymous 1911 letter to the editor talked about the fiend who walks under the sign of the circle and cross. The phrasing made my skin crawl. I must have looked spooked when I took the printouts back, because the librarian told me, a little too casually, that special collections had older materials on the symbol if I wanted context. Special collections is Basement Plus. Too bright, too controlled, full of heavy tables and white gloves. The librarian there said the circle cross predates the 60s and brought me a thin, leather-bound book from 1896. The title was On the Influence of Celestial Characters and Ritual Language by 1 Pelham, 1896, star, asterisk. Somewhere in the middle was a woodcut of a circle with a cross through it. Cruder, but the same idea. Underneath it, someone had written that this zodiac sign isn't just a horoscope symbol, used in sequence with other characters and spoken, according to hidden measure. It calls down an intelligence that walks under the mark of the circle and cross, and moves from man to man as the stars move from house to house. The author called them zodiac ciphers. He said they were living sentences, each set of symbols a kind of starborn thought that, once invited, doesn't like to leave. He said the danger is less in seeing them than in repeating them, less in sight than in breath. One line, from some older source he quoted, stuck in my head. The mark is not on the paper but upon the reader who knows it. I should have stopped there. I didn't. I copied the diagram. I copied the sentences. I justified it with academic language in my head. Structure, context, draw connections between historical narratives. But the truth is, I just kept going because part of me wanted to see what would happen. On the page of my notebook, the circle cross seemed like it was tilting. Not physically, just wrong in my head, like it was leaning toward me. I stayed until my hand cramped. I didn't realize how long I'd been there until Sophie texted, full caps, that she'd brought Wendy's and I was disrespecting the fries. I sent her a picture of the book and the symbol. She wrote back, "Absolutely not. Leave that where it belongs and get your butt home." I brought the feeling with me anyway. The fight happened 2 days later. I walked into our room to find Sophie in the middle of it. She was pissed, holding her hair script like it was contaminated. She asked me if I thought this was funny. Every page was covered in my handwriting. Not notes, not underlines. The same line, over and over, in margins and between stage directions. This is the zodiac. Sometimes ending with speaking. Sometimes with I am here. Saw if I didn't. I started, then stopped. Because I had. I remembered sitting on the couch, the script in my lap, pen in my hand, telling myself I'd just underline her cues. And then nothing. A jump cut. Time gone. She told me those were her only notes. That tech was coming. That I'd wrecked them. I told her I didn't remember doing it. She said I was scaring her. That was the part that hurt. Because she was right. I was scaring me too. It felt like my hand and my brain had been divorced for the afternoon. Like I'd been used as a printer. She said either I stopped or she would go to Halperin and tell him something was wrong. She didn't care if that meant my grade tanked. She cared whether I was losing my mind. She left the script on my bed. I stared at the words on the cover. This is the Zodiac. I swear the letters looked pleased. The night I finished my first full draft, the bruise on my chest stopped aching. Relief should have followed. It didn't. It felt like having a warning alarm suddenly cut mid-scream. My walls were covered in ciphers, like manic wallpaper. My laptop screen glowed with paragraphs that moved in and out of my own voice, sometimes clinical, sometimes a little too theatrical. Between the research and the timeline, sentences I didn't remember typing had slipped in. Maybe the Zodiac was never a man, but a costume anyone could put on. Maybe the ciphers weren't codes to be solved, but spells to be cast. I told myself it was just the theater kid in me speaking, but I left them in. I wrote about the headlines from the 60s and 70s, the earlier murders, the Pelham book, the idea of Zodiac ciphers as living sentences. I wrote that the thing we call Zodiac didn't start in the 60s. It's older, patient, happy to wait and change masks. I wrote that staring, copying breath, those were the engine. You don't just solve a puzzle. You build a door. I had one blank page left. Clean, white, waiting. I'd been saving the Z340 for last. The unsolved celebrity of the ciphers. Reddit's favorite chew toy. The one people have practically ruined their lives over trying to solve. I dipped my pen. My hand moved faster than I wanted it to. As I wrote the symbols, the air in the room thickened, like humidity without heat. Shadows in the corners seemed to pool, like someone had deepened them with a brush. The desk lamp felt wrong. The light wasn't landing on the page. It bent around it, like the paper was the center of some invisible lens. In the back of my mind, Larkin's voice said, "Don't read them out loud." I didn't. I whispered. The sounds came easy this time. My tongue knew where to go like it had been practicing without me. Clicks, hisses, sliding bits of not language that still felt meaningful. My breath fogged in front of my lips like it was cold, even though the room was not. Behind me, the floor creaked. Slow, heavy, step by step, like someone was standing there, shifting their weight. I kept writing. When I drew the final symbol, the circle and cross, something in the air aligned. The room didn't shake. No thunder. It was smaller than that. It felt like a room full of people inhaling together before a show starts. Then a voice spoke, not out loud, inside, like it had been printed on the inside of my skull, and someone finally flipped the ink visible. "I am here." I turned around. He was, not in the mirror, not in a reflection, in my doorway. The thing was boxy and almost stupid, like someone had stretched black fabric over a stack of cereal boxes. The symbol on his chest glowed softly, like it had its own backlight. The eye holes were nothing but layered dark. He didn't feel like anger or hunger. He felt like attention, focus, being studied. My body should have screamed. Fight, flight, something. Instead, I felt calm. Theater brain kicked in first. It felt like stepping into a scene I'd rehearsed in my sleep. I told him he wasn't real. It came out of my mouth automatically. In my head, layered voices answered. The taped voice, Larkin's voice, newscasters, panic callers, all of them braided together. "You made me real." I asked who he was. He didn't say Zodiac straight out. He didn't need to. The symbol on his chest pulsed. He implied that names are masks, and humans love masks. "I wear many, Claudia. Student, actor, journalist." He's worn plenty himself. And then it hit me like a fast-cut montage. Not memories. Not mine. Glimpses. Someone walking on a dark road in 1968. Humming. A cab interior. A barn in 1923 with the circle chalked on the wall. A painter studio in 1911. A Victorian alley slick with something. Different hands. Different cities. Same hood. Same mark. Same moment. Hovering in all of them like a chorus note. That slide from curiosity into fear. I told him he possessed them. He said they invited him. Every letter writer, every cryptography nerd, every cop who stayed late at his desk alone with symbols, every podcast fan replaying the ciphers. He said my research, my copying, my whispering, my article, my tape, all of that was me turning the knob. Then he touched me with the pen, right in the center of my chest, where the dream bruise had been. It was cold, bone cold, and then it wasn't pressing on anything anymore. It was inside me, like the space behind my sternum wasn't solid. There was no pain, no blood, no breaking or tearing, no horror movie moment. Just this sensation of something slipping into a silence that had been waiting for it. In my head, every cipher I'd looked at collapsed into one sound, a chord made of symbols. For a second I saw myself from above, small, hunched over a desk, eyes wide. Then that view folded inward, like a stage set being struck, until everything that was just me suddenly had more rooms in it. He didn't take over. Not exactly. He layered on, like a transparent mask laid over my thoughts. I could feel him behind them, like an understudy who knows all the lines and is ready to step in whenever the lead falters. Outside my room, Sophie's door opened. She called my name and complained that I was talking to myself again and that it was 3 a.m. I turned toward the sound. In the mirror on my dresser, my reflection lagged again. For one heartbeat, the hood looked back instead of my face. The symbol burned where my t-shirt should be. Then it snapped back. Just me. Hair mess, ink on my hands. My voice sounded normal when I apologized to her and told her I was just finishing the article. Maybe a little lower, fuller. She told me to get some sleep and made another brittle joke about serial killer ghosts. I smiled. My chest felt warm where the invisible mark sat. When I whispered too late, she didn't hear it. The next day I turned my draft in. Halpern loved it. Said it was ambitious and a little theatrical, but in a good way. He forwarded it to some podcast producer, who emailed back asking if I'd be willing to record a narration to go with the tape clips. She'd especially liked the mythos angle. Of course I said yes. In the studio, they gave me big over-ear headphones and a mic that made me sound more like myself than I ever have in my own ears. My voice came through lower and smoother than I expected. When we got to the section about the ciphers, the producer asked if I'd be okay reading some of the unsolved one. Just a few lines. They could distort it later for legal slash. Don't freak out the fans' reasons. A week earlier, I would have hesitated. I would have seen Larkin's face in that diner. I would have thought about Sophie holding her ruined script. I would have remembered the pen passing through my chest. Instead, I smiled and said sure. The paper in front of me had the cipher printed nice and clear, but I didn't look at it. The sounds are just there now. Easy. Natural. They sit on my tongue like lines from a show you've been running for weeks. We did 3 takes. On the last one, the lights in the sound booth flickered for a second, just like in the archive. No one commented. I'm starting to realize how much humans will ignore if you don't name it out loud. When I left the building, the city felt different. Not louder, not busier, just full, the way a lung feels full. Every person at the crosswalk, every car, every lit window, it all felt like marks on a stage diagram. Places to stand, entrances, exits, like I could see invisible blocking lines painted under everyone's feet. Sophie called while I was waiting for the light. She wanted to know how it had gone. I told her it was amazing, that they were going to air it next month. She called me a podcast star and said when I was done being haunted, I needed to help her deal with the director's notes. She asked if I was okay because I sounded different. I told her I just hadn't slept. Promised I'd nap before rehearsal. She said, "You're no good to me half dead." I laughed. If she heard the extra echo in it, The extra notes under my own voice. She didn't say anything. You probably clicked into this expecting a Reddit post made by some chick claiming to have finally solved the Zodiac case. You want the neat version. I find a hidden confession, a stray hair, a photograph, something that finally pins it on one guy forever. Arthur Lee Allen, probably. Maybe I exonerate him. Maybe I point to somebody else and hand you that sweet, narcotic feeling of closure. That's not the story I found. What I found is older and worse. It doesn't care who you think did it. It doesn't care about suspects or timelines. It doesn't even care that much about the bodies, if I'm honest. It cares that you're reading this. What I found lives in ink and paper and hissy old tape and scanned PDFs and Reddit threads and comment sections and books from 1896 that nobody but weird grad students and cursed undergrads pull off the shelf. It uses attention the way we use oxygen. Every time someone pores over those ciphers, tracing the symbols, thinking about them, whispering them, try to be the one who finally cracks the code. It's like knocking. There wasn't a Zodiac killer. There were men who put the hood on, yes. In the 60s, and before that too. Under different names, different headlines. The Fiend under the sign. The Circle and Cross Man. Whatever Pelham politely refused to spell out. There were the people who never actually killed anyone, but got close enough in their heads that something moved into the space behind their eyes anyway. The ones whose lives shrank down to letters and theories until something else was driving. I know who Zodiac is now. It's the thing that watches you when you scroll past that symbol on your phone and tell yourself you're not into true crime. You're just curious. It's the little shiver of pleasure you feel when you say, "We'll never know," but still read every new article. It's the voice that tells you you're smarter than the cops, that you'll be the one to finally crack the cipher. It's the hood shape your brain fills and at the corner of your mirror in the dark. There wasn't one Zodiac. There were dozens. And now there's me. I found the hood folded in the bottom drawer of my dresser, on top of old jazz tights. Black, heavy, stiff in a way fabric shouldn't be. I don't remember buying it or making it. Hell, I don't remember ever owning it. But when I touched it, it warmed under my fingers like it recognized me. Beneath it sat a gun and a box of bullets I had no memory of owning. I should have panicked, but I didn't. I just felt aligned, like everything had finally snapped into place. Lover's lanes in 2025? Please. Nobody parks under stars anymore. They match in apps, meet in bathrooms, disappear between notifications. Good thing symbols travel just fine through screens. Consider this my first letter. This is the Zodiac speaking. This happened a year ago when I went hiking alone in the state park. I'm writing it down because I still have nightmares about it, and my therapist says it might help to get it out. I don't know if that's true, but here it is. The ridge must have washed out sometime in the last couple of weeks. I stood at the edge of the trail where runoff had carved a gully through the packed earth, exposing tree roots twisted through the dirt. Murky water still pooled at the bottom. I could backtrack. Add an hour, maybe two. Or I could cut through the trees, parallel the trail for a few hundred yards, rejoin it past the damage. Honestly, it would be quicker just to go overland and cut out the switchback entirely. It was probably less than a mile. The forest here was old-growth Douglas fir, the canopy thick enough to turn noon into twilight. Sword ferns everywhere, thick clumps of salal between the trees. But it looked passable. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. Hadn't been one since the last fire road. I pushed into the trees. The ground gave under my boots, soft with rot and moss. Humid air pressed against my face, carrying the smell of decomposition and wet bark. My breathing was loud, the rustle of my pack against my shoulders. I picked my way between the ferns, tried to maintain a straight line. The washed-out section couldn't be more than a quarter mile. Easy enough. The trail disappeared behind me after 20 yards. I didn't see the trap until my boot was already through the leaf litter. The snap was mechanical. Final. I didn't understand at first. Pressure clamped around my calf. The world tilted before I understood why, and I hit the ground. My pack twisted, straps digging into my shoulders. My vision went dark at the edges. It slowly cleared. I was on my back, staring up through the canopy. My chest worked like I'd been sprinting. Short and shallow gasps that didn't seem to bring in enough air. I forced myself to look down. The trap was old, rust-pitted and half-buried. The jaws had closed just below my knee. Metal teeth punched clean through my pants leg. Fabric had torn where it had pressed into flesh. Blood was already soaking through the denim, spreading in a dark stain. I tried to pull my leg back. The trap didn't move. The pain doubled, and a sound came out of me that I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking when I reached down to touch the metal. The jaws had sunk deep enough that I couldn't get my fingers between the steel and my leg. I pulled at the springs on either side, but they were fused with corrosion, immovable. I lay back, tried to think. Something inside my calf kept jumping, spasming under the skin. When I shifted my weight, the bones ground together and my vision whited out for a second. The blood spread further, running down into my boot now. I tilted my head back and screamed. My pack. I needed my pack. I twisted, ignoring the spike of pain, and dragged it off my shoulders. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I unzipped the main compartment. First aid kit, water, food, headlamp, nothing that would pry open a bare trap. My phone was in the side pocket. No signal when I pulled it up. The bleeding hadn't stopped. My sock was soaked through, boot filling. Warmth spread down to my toes. I didn't know how much blood I could lose. Couldn't remember if I'd ever known. Wait for rescue. Stay put, conserve energy. Hope someone noticed I was overdue. Except no one knew I'd left the trail. And the trail itself saw maybe 3 hikers a week this time of year. I'd signed the register at the trailhead yesterday morning. If someone found my car in a few days, they'd start a search. But they'd look along the marked route first. It could be a week before anyone pushed into this section of forest. I had to get out of the trap. I pulled my hiking pole from the side of my pack. Then the paracord from the bear bag setup, 30 feet of it, and a carabiner. I looped the paracord through the carabiner and clipped it to the trap's spring mechanism on the right side. Fed the other end through and around the hiking pole. I need to pry both springs at once to release the jaws, but if I could get one side open even partially, create some give, maybe the other would follow. I braced the pole against a nearby root and pulled. The cord went taut. The spring didn't move. I repositioned, planted my good leg for leverage, and pulled harder. My palms burned where the cord dug in. The pole bowed slightly. The spring gave a fraction of an inch, then held. Not enough. I unwound the cord and tried a different configuration. More wraps around the pole for mechanical advantage. This time when I pulled, the spring shifted. A quarter inch. Half. The jaws loosened. The teeth dragged through muscle as they moved. Tissue tore. The serrated edge caught on something deep inside my leg and pulled. The pain shot up into my hip, down to my ankle. My stomach lurched. I kept pulling. The spring gave another inch. The pressure on my leg decreased slightly. The teeth had punched through skin and fat into the meat underneath. Dark blood welled up. I blacked out. When I came to, I was on my side in the leaves. The pole had fallen. The spring had snapped back into place. My leg was still in the trap. I lay there for a while. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 5 minutes. Then I sat up and started again. This time I didn't stop when the pain spiked. I pulled until my arms shook, until the cord bit deep grooves into my palms. The spring moved. The other side shifted in response, corroded metal shrieking. The jaws opened. I dragged my leg out. Flesh came with it. Strips of tissue caught on the teeth, stretching and tearing as my calf pulled free. I saw bone. White fragments among the red. Part of my pant leg stayed behind. Fabric embedded in the mechanism. The trap snapped shut again, empty. The wound ran in a complete circle, punctures and lacerations where each tooth had sunk in. The deepest points were on either side, front and back where the jaws had closed. Dark meat shredded. Deeper than that, past the subcutaneous fat, the pale gleam of my tibia. Blood poured out. I fumbled for the first aid kit. 3 tries to get the zipper open. Gauze pads, medical tape, a single ace bandage that would do exactly nothing. I packed the gauze against the wounds, wrapping the entire calf. Blood soaked through immediately. I added more, kept wrapping, used the tape to hold it in place. Then the ace bandage over that, pulled tight enough that my foot started to tingle. Not tight enough, still bleeding through. I pulled my belt off and cinched it around my thigh, above the knee. Yanked it until the leather creaked. The bleeding slowed. My boot was full of blood. It sloshed when I moved my ankle. I needed a splint, something to keep the leg immobile. I looked around, found a fallen branch about the right length, and used the remaining paracord to lash it against my calf. The pressure made me gag, but I kept tying knots until it held firm. Done. Sweating despite the cold, my shirt stuck to my back. I looked at the surrounding forest, tried to orient myself. I'd been heading roughly northwest when I'd left the trail, meaning the trail should be northeast. But everything looked the same. Ferns and moss and Douglas for trunks disappearing into shadow. No landmarks, no clear sight lines. My mind swam with pain. Which way? Which way? I picked a direction and started crawling. I couldn't put weight on the leg. Even the thought of trying made my vision blur. So I moved on my stomach, using my forearms to drag myself forward. My good leg kicked for purchase, boots sliding through the leaf litter. My injured leg caught on everything. Roots, exposed rocks. The splint would shift, and the bones inside would grind together, and I'd have to stop. Forehead pressed into the dirt. My pack dragged behind me, still clipped to my chest strap. Dead weight, but it had my water, my headlamp. I couldn't leave it. The forest floor was a mess of obstacles. Fallen logs I had to navigate around. Dense patches of salal that forced detours. My jacket snagged on thorns. My hands sank into soft rot that released the smell of decay. I'd gone maybe 50 yards when the rain started. Just a mist at first, barely more than heavy air. Then it thickened, drops pattering on the canopy overhead, filtering down through the needles. Minutes later my jacket was soaked. Water ran down my neck, into my collar. The ground went soft under me, then soupy. I kept moving. Northeast. I was sure it was northeast. There was a slight upward slope, and I followed it, reasoning that the trail followed the ridgeline. Uphill meant closer, except after another 100 yards the slope plateaued, and I found myself in a small clearing where a tree had come down years ago. The trunk was massive, half-rotted, covered in moss and shell fungus. Beyond it, the forest continued, identical in every direction. I stopped, tried to think through the cold and the pain. Had I been going uphill or downhill? The slope had felt upward, but now I wasn't sure. And the rain made everything slick, disorienting. Distances stretched. Somewhere to my left, a branch cracked. I turned my head but saw nothing. Just the vertical lines of tree trunks fading into gray. Another crack. Closer this time. Then a rustle of undergrowth. Deer probably. Or elk. The forest wasn't empty. I'd just been too loud earlier to notice. Now that I'd stopped, now that I was quiet, the sounds filtered back in. Except they didn't sound like animals moving. I held my breath and listened. Something that might have been a voice, far off. I almost called back before I caught myself. Nothing out here but trees. I reached back and checked the tourniquet. Still tight. The gauze underneath was soaked, but the bleeding had slowed to a seep. I started moving again. The mud helped in some ways. It was slick enough that my body slid easier, my jacket gliding over the surface. But it also meant less traction for my good leg. I'd push off and my boot would spin out, sending me sliding sideways into a fern or a half-buried stone. My arms burned. Each pull forward took more effort than the last, shoulders wrenching. The rain picked up. It pooled in the small of my back, ran down my sides. My hands were numb, fingers barely able to grip. I focused on small distances. That root 5 feet ahead, the gap between those two trees. One goal at a time. Somewhere above, the canopy thinned and I caught a glimpse of sky. Solid gray, no sun to navigate by. The light was diffuse, directionless. I checked my phone. 2:18 p.m. Less than 2 hours of crawling, and I'd covered maybe a quarter mile. At this rate, I'd still be in the forest when night came. The sharp pain in my leg had settled into a deep throb that never let up. I stopped to drink water. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the bottle. Half of it spilled down my chin. I forced myself to swallow 3 long pulls, then capped it and kept going. The underbrush thickened. Sight lines shortened. I was crawling through sword ferns now, the fronds slapping against my face, and I had to push them aside to see more than a few feet ahead. A root caught my splint and twisted it sideways. The bone shifted. I felt it move, felt the broken ends grate against each other, and I screamed into the mud. Air came back. I'd veered off course, heading downhill now. The ground sloping away. Wrong direction. I angled right, trying to correct, but the slope steepened, and I started to slide. My fingers clawed at the ground. Found nothing. I picked up speed, jacket slick with mud, and then the ground disappeared, and I was falling. The drop was only 6 feet, but I hit hard. Shoulder first, then my hip, and finally my injured leg slammed into the rocks at the bottom of the ravine. Everything went white. I was curled on my side, both hands clutching my thigh. I couldn't breathe, couldn't make my lungs work. My mouth opened and closed, but nothing came in. Then my diaphragm released, and I sucked in air. Huge gasping pulls that burned my throat. I lay there. The ravine was narrow, maybe 10 feet across, choked with fallen branches and standing water. The walls were steep, slick clay embedded with stones. I'd slid down the eastern side. Above me the edge looked impossibly far away. My leg was screaming. Fresh, bright pain. Something had gotten worse. I didn't want to look, but I made myself. The splint had broken. The branch had snapped in the middle. The two halves held together only by the paracord wrapping. My calf bulged between them, swollen and dark. The gauze was completely soaked through, more red than white. I closed my eyes. The rain continued. I could hear it hitting the water pooled around me, a soft patter that would have been pleasant under different circumstances. Cold seeped through my jacket, through my shirt, into my skin. I thought about staying here, just for a minute, long enough to rest. I could stay here, let the moss cover me. They'd find bones eventually, maybe the belt buckle. I opened my eyes. Through the rain and the gray light, something upstream, a gap in the trees. The ravine curved and widened, and beyond that curve the undergrowth thinned. I knew that gap. I'd seen it from the trail 2 days ago. A clearing where loggers had worked decades back. Stumps still visible among the new growth. The trail ran along the western edge of that clearing. I started crawling again. The ravine bottom was the worst terrain yet. Standing water hid the depth of the mud beneath. Twice my arm sank to the elbow, and I had to wrench it free. The suction pulling at me. Branches jabbed into my stomach, my ribs. My broken leg dragged behind me, the splint catching on every obstacle. I moved in increments. 6 inches. A foot. Rest. Another foot. My breathing had gone shallow. I couldn't seem to get enough air, and my heart hammered against my sternum. The gap in the trees didn't get closer. I crawled for what felt like an hour, and it stayed the same distance away. Fixed and unreachable. That wasn't possible. I was moving. I stopped and put my forehead against the ground. The mud was cold. It smelled like iron and rot. When I looked up again, the gap had shifted. Closer now. Maybe 50 yards. I kept going. The ravine widened. The walls lowered. I passed a stump, the wood soft and black with decay, and recognized it. I'd seen this stump. I was sure of it. Then I was in the clearing. The canopy opened overhead. Rain fell straight down, no longer filtered through needles and branches. The light was gray and flat. The far tree line was maybe 200 yards across open ground. And there, barely visible through the rain, a wooden post. Trail marker. My arms gave out. I lay in the mud with my face turned sideways, staring at the post. Weathered wood with a faded white blaze. I started crawling again. The clearing was less overgrown than the forest, but the ground was uneven, full of hidden depressions where my weight would suddenly drop, and my leg would twist. Each time it happened, the pain spiked and my vision tunneled. I was shaking now. Full body tremors I couldn't control. My teeth chattered. I was going to die 50 yards from the trail. The thought made me laugh. A wet, ragged sound that turned into coughing. I crawled. The trail marker resolved as I got closer. 4 feet tall, the white blaze chipped and weathered but unmistakable. Beyond it was the trail itself, a thin line of packed earth cutting through the undergrowth. My arms were beyond burning now. They felt distant and mechanical. My good leg had stopped responding properly. When I tried to push off, it just twitched. Something cracked in a tree line to my right. I turned my head. A Douglas fir swayed, branches moving. But there was no wind. The rain fell straight down. I watched the tree for a long time, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. Finally, my hand touched the post. Rough wood under my palm, solid and real. I pulled myself alongside it and onto the trail. The ground was harder here, packed dirt instead of mud. I lay on my back and stared up at the sky. The rain hit my face, ran into my eyes. The light was fading, gray shifting toward dark. In another hour, I wouldn't be able to see. The trailhead was north, 2 miles, maybe 3. I'd made better time on the way in, but I'd been walking then and whole. I couldn't crawl 2 miles. I knew that with absolute certainty. My body had nothing left. But the trail meant people. Not today, probably not tomorrow, but eventually. Someone would come through. They'd find me, if I lasted that long. I rolled onto my stomach and kept moving. The trail made it easier. No routes to navigate around, no hidden drops. Just a clear path forward. My vision kept blurring, edges going dark. I'd blink and find myself 10 feet further, along with no memory of covering the distance. My injured leg had gone numb below the knee. I couldn't tell if that was good or bad. Maybe I'd left the tourniquet too tight. Maybe the nerves were just gone. I didn't have the energy to check. The shaking had gotten worse. My jaw ached from clenching against the chatter. Somewhere ahead, I heard an engine. A truck, maybe, or a car with a bad muffler. The trailhead had a small parking area. Gravel lot, room for 5 or 6 vehicles. I'd left my car there yesterday morning. If I could make it to the lot, even if no one was there, I could get inside the car, turn on the heat, call for help once I had signal. The engine's sound faded. I crawled faster, arms pulling, good leg kicking. The trail curved, and I followed it, staying in the center where the ground was most even. My hands were torn up, palms shredded and bleeding from the paracord earlier, from rocks and roots and 7 hours of dragging myself across the forest floor. They didn't hurt. Nothing hurt except my leg. The rain stopped. I didn't notice it first. Then I realized my face was dry, the patter of drops on my jacket gone. I looked up. The clouds were still there, but the rain had passed. The temperature dropped further. I needed to stop shaking, needed to conserve energy. But my body wouldn't listen. The tremors ran through me in waves, muscles firing without my input. The trail dipped into a small depression, then rose. At the top of the rise, light shone through the trees. Not daylight, yellow and artificial. Street light, light ahead. The solar lamp at the trailhead, yellow against the trees. The last 100 yards took forever. The trail rose gradually, and my arms barely had the strength to pull me uphill. I'd move a few feet, stop, wait for my vision to clear, then move again. The light got brighter. I could make out individual trees now, the edge of the parking lot, the square shape of the information kiosk. The parking lot was empty. No cars, just gravel and the wooden kiosk and the solar lamp throwing its yellow circle across the ground. My car was gone. I stared at the empty space where I thought I'd left it. Maybe someone had dropped me off. Or maybe I'd parked at a different trailhead and gotten confused. I realized I was going into shock. I pulled myself past the trailhead sign, onto the gravel. Stones dug into my elbows. My leg dragged behind me, the broken splint scraping. The lamp hummed above me. I could hear it clearly now that I was out of the forest. A steady electrical buzz. Beyond the parking lot was the access road. Single lane, poorly maintained. It connected to the main highway about 3 miles north. During the day, there'd be traffic. Logging trucks, the occasional tourist. But it was past 7 now. Full dark within the hour. I crawled to the edge of the road and stopped. Asphalt under my hands. Smooth and flat. I pressed my cheek against it and closed my eyes. I didn't pass out. I stayed conscious. aware of the cold and the pain and the way my pulse felt thin and distant, but I couldn't move. My arms were done. My good leg wouldn't respond. I lay there and listened. The forest behind me was quiet. No wind, no animal sounds. Just that electric hum from the lamp and my own breathing. Time passed. I wasn't sure how much. Then I heard something new. Faint at first. A low rumble from the north. I opened my eyes. Headlights appeared around the curve, maybe half a mile up the road. 2 white beams cutting through the dusk. The engine's sound grew louder. I tried to lift my arm, managed to get it a few inches off the ground before it fell back. The vehicle was closer now. Quarter mile. It was a truck, high chassis, moving slow on the rough road. I opened my mouth. My throat was raw and tight. The sound that came out was barely more than a rasp. The truck kept coming. I tried again, louder this time. A hoarse shout that tore at my vocal cords. The headlights swept across me, catching me sprawled half on the asphalt, mud-covered jacket, destroyed leg dragging behind. The truck's brakes squealed. It stopped 20 feet away, engine idling. The driver's door opened, and someone got out. I couldn't see details, just a silhouette against the headlights. Footsteps on gravel. Running. Then a voice. Jesus Christ. I tried to answer, but nothing came out. Hands on my shoulder, my arm. The person kept talking. Something about an ambulance, about staying awake. I heard the beep of a phone. Numbers being pressed. Yeah, I need emergency services. I'm on Forest Road 38, just past the trailhead. I've got a guy here. He's in bad shape. Looks like his leg is, Yeah, he's conscious. Barely. The voice moved away, still talking. I heard the truck door open, the rustle of fabric. Then the person was back, draping something over me. A blanket. They're coming. The voice said, 10 minutes, maybe 15. You hang on. I managed a nod, the smallest movement. The person stayed next to me. I could hear them breathing. Beyond the parking lot, the forest was dark, but the blanket was warm and I was still alive. I spent 8 days in the hospital. They had to do 3 surgeries to clean out the wound and repair what they could. The tibia had a hairline fracture. Muscle damage was extensive. Nerve damage worse. I still walk with a limp. My calf is mostly scar tissue now. Numb in places, hypersensitive in others. I can't run anymore. The rangers went back and found the trap. It was ancient, probably from the 30s or 40s, when people still trapped in that area. Illegal now, and it should have been cleared decades ago, but it wasn't. Just sitting there under the leaves, waiting. They checked my car situation. Turns out I had parked at the trailhead. A ranger had ticketed it for an expired Discover Pass and had it towed. I laughed when they told me. Couldn't help it. I'd been meaning to get it renewed for over a year and kept forgetting. The guy who found me was a logger heading home after a late shift. Right place, right time. The doctor said if I'd been out there another hour, I probably would have bled out or gone into complete shock. Sometimes I still dream about crawling. I wake up and my arms are moving, pulling at the sheets, and for a second I'm back in that forest with the rain coming down and no idea which direction I'm going.